Hello and welcome everyone. In this session, we're going to talk about the internal control systems. This is one of the key area for this paper, internal accounting system and control. And from this chapter, we're going to look at the weakness in the control system. We're going to look at what sort of impact can have in the organization. That means like what type of fraud could happen if there is a weakness in the internal control system. And what is the recommendation? So what is the way we have to improve this weakness? So the recommendation and the control could be in place. So let's have a look at our chapter number 2, internal control system. If we look at the learning outcomes, it says internal control, learner need to understand the purpose of internal control. So we need to understand what is the reason we need to have a control. And then they said the types of internal control used in different part of the accounting function. So what type of internal control we could be put in place in the different accounting function. So for example, the segregation of duties, then organizational control, authorization and approval, physical control, supervision, personnel, arithmetical and accounting, and management. So this sort of control normally the business use in order to make sure there is a proper control in place. How different type of internal control suit different type of organization. So we have a different size of business, for example small, medium and large, and the nature may be cash based, credit based or online. So different sort of business can have a different sort of internal control. For example, if there is a retail business, maybe the credit customer amount will not be that high because everyone buy from superstore or from retail, maybe they pay immediately for that. But if you're looking at the credit card company, so this sort of business, they need a high volume of credit customer, they have a high volume of credit customer. So the internal control for these two company could be different because maybe you need more credit control on the credit card company than the retail business. Then we have prevent and detect fraud, systematic weakness. So we need to also learn from here the common type of fraud within the business. For example, misappropriation of fund, for example monetary and the inventory, then misstatement of financial statement. So we need to look at all of this. Systematic weakness and their cause: lack of control, poor implementation of control, lack of monitoring, lack of leadership. And also we have implication for an organization if fraud occurs. So the fraud could always occur from two perspectives: from the financial perspective, from the non-financial perspective. Financial perspective always bring the financial loss for the business. For example, when there is a monetary loss, so you lose the money, that's basically the financial loss or the financial fraud. But if there is a reputation damage for the business, that is non-financial loss. For example, if there is a no ethical environment in the business or the employee are not treating fairly or equally, they might leave the organization. So this is non-financially loss for the business. The role of internal control is preventing fraud and error, detecting fraud and error. So first we try to prevent the fraud and later we will look at detecting the fraud. Learner need to be able to identify the circumstance when fraud may occur, and also we have to look at evaluate the impact of fraud of an organization. So we need to evaluate that, financial and non-financial. Then we have here assess how internal control can be used in preventing and detecting the fraud, make suggestion for internal control to prevent and detect the fraud, assess the cause of systemic weakness in internal control system. So more or less we have seen we're going to cover the weakness in the internal control system, and also we're going to look at what type of fraud is happening here and how we can prevent this fraud. So basically three things. First, looking at the weakness. Next, because of this weakness, what type of fraud could happen, and finally how we can stop this fraud. So this is basically the content that we'll cover for this chapter. The next one we have internal control system. That's the chapter overview. So let's have a look what we're going to cover from here. So you have an internal control environment. So the control environment is basically very important. Here we're going to look at how we actually control the environment. So with ethical behavior. So if there is a proper ethical behavior in the organization, so it is possible you can stop so much bad thing could happen to your organization. For example, if you can create a ethical environment because of the proper internal control in place, maybe people will not be able to do the fraud and they will have a regular practice to do everything correctly. Type of control activities. So we have spam SOAP. So here it is the short form and we need to look at what type of control we can put in place. So a spam SOAP will help us to remember this control. Then we have preventing the fraud. We're going to look at a few areas. It's a sales system, then we have a purchase system, and we have a payroll system. Then we have a detecting fraud. So we have a fraud matrix, key performance indicator, and the ratios. Impact of fraud, so that we discussed before. So because of the fraud, there could be a financial impact and there could be a non-financial impact. So there could be a financial loss for the business and there could be a non-financial loss for the business. System of internal control, on the other hand, tell us internal control environment, types of control. So we said internal control environment, type of control, activities. So we have a spam SOAP. So this is the one we said we need to look at. We need to remember that spam SOAP. Then we have a security of the accounting system. So limiting access, preventing the error. So what type of security we can put in place? So we can limit the access to every individual in every department. For example, on the payroll department, maybe the sales department is staff. They don't need to have access on that department. So for that reason, we can limit the access for the sales or purchasing department to go into the payroll for open access. Then we have internal control system for different type of organizations. So company size, cash or credit based, online. So what type of organization it is also important. Then we have ethical behavior that we have talked. So we need to make sure the fundamental principle is in place. So that the 5 fundamental principle of ethics we're going to look at in the chapter as well. Then we have a fraud, misappropriation of the asset, then misstatement of the financial statement. Misstatement of the financial statement means you represent the financial statement with the wrong data or inaccurate data. For example, you try to overstate the profit by showing more sales, or you want to understate the profit by showing more expense. So this sort of thing, basically fraud. Impact of fraud, financial, so that is you can lose money. Then reputation, you can damage the reputation of your organization. Then employee morale, so the employee maybe don't feel good to work for your organization. Control to prevent fraud and systematic weakness, sales system fraud, purchase system fraud, and detecting fraud. So all these things we're going to look at from this chapter. So let's have a look at our introduction. It's saying in this chapter we will look at the purpose and the type of internal control commonly found in organization. A strong system of internal control minimize financial loss within the organization, can ensure that ethical standards are maintained. Weak control are one of the reasons that fraud may occur within the organization. So we need to make sure like the control need to be strong. We will look at the common type of fraud and the implication of the fraud within the organization. Organization need to have a good internal control to prevent fraud taking place, with particular focus on the importance of the segregation of duty within the accounting function. So within the accounting function, we need to make sure one person don't do all the job. For example, one person is in charge for ordering all the purchase or ordering all the materials we need for the organization, and also this person at the same time is responsible or authorized to make the payment for all the invoices. So if the same person can order and authorize the invoice, it's very hard to see he may be not ordering everything for the best interest for the company, or maybe he's ordering something for his personal reason and he putting as a business. So it's very important to have this understanding of the segregation of duties. So one person need to do some work and another person need to check it. For example, if the payroll manager make the payroll, and then the financial director should check is everything is accurate. Accounting systems are at risk of a specific fraud, namely payroll fraud, payable ledger fraud, and receivables ledger fraud. We'll look at the controls that should be in place to prevent this. So these three are very important. So the first one is the payroll fraud. It's a very common. Then the payroll ledger fraud and the receivables ledger fraud. So this is three area normally the question tested in the exam. So need to make sure we are okay with that. Internal control. So you have internal controls are the policy and the procedure that address the risk that aim and objective of the company will not be met. So internal control, what is the internal control? Is basically are the policies and the procedure that address the risk. So that's identify the risk and that aim and objective of the company will not be met. So obviously, like if you don't put the internal control, it will be hard for the company to fulfill its aim and objective. The purpose of the internal control is to facilitate the operation, safeguard the asset, prevent and detect the fraud, ensure quality of internal and external reporting, and the compliance. So this sort of thing basically the main purpose of the internal control. Internal control work alongside the control environment to create the overall control framework. This is known as system of internal control, and this is the combination of the control environment, the entity risk assessment process, and the entity process to monitor the system of internal control, the information system and the communication and the control activities. So this sort of thing basically comes under the internal control. The control environment. The control environment is all about like what type of awareness and what type of action management took in order to make sure the system are working properly. So obviously every company have a different environment and every single environment has to be controlled by the management. So how we do that? So we have to make sure we have a proper policy and procedure. Number one, everyone following these procedures and the policies, and if someone don't, management took a immediate action for that. The control environment is part of the system of internal control alongside the internal control themselves. So the owner or the management of the company must ensure that these control activities are regularly monitored and tested. So for example, if something is not working, the management should take the immediate action. For example, let's say if we buy something from the supermarket and if we scan that product and it's make a sound of a beep, and every time when you scan a product it's a beep, so this beep shows the system is working. So every single company, they have a different sort of way of maintaining their business, and they put a different sort of internal control, but we need to make sure is it working properly. The next one we have here, management must regularly assess the existing system and identify any new risks which may affect both the control system currently. Without this monitoring, there is unlikely to be a strong control environment. So there is a proper and regular monitoring is very important. Indication of a good control environment include the following: management communicate and enforce integrity and ethical behavior. So we need to make sure there is ethical behavior, so and management communication. So if the employees are ethical, if the employee behave ethical and they are honest, they are not biased, so it is most likely there will be a proper internal control environment in the organization. Management and staff are well trained and competent, so they have to know the work. For example, if you don't provide the proper training to the employee or the management, maybe by mistake, even without intentionally, they might break the internal control, or maybe they will not follow it because they don't know how to use it. Then management operates in a way that promote the control. Example, regularly monitoring whether the control are working and adhere to in practice. The company and the accounting function is structured in a way that promote the control. Authority and the responsibility for the control is assigned to separate people in segregation of duty. So segregation of duty is very important because this will make the work authorized by two persons rather than one. Human resource policy promote control. So if you have a human resource policy, that also helps to have a better control. Management regularly review. So this is always important. Then we have a types of control activity. So control activity. So as we discussed before, this spam SOAP will help us to remember what type of control we can put in place in order to make sure the system are strong, the control environment are strong. Control activities are policy and the procedure that help ensure that objectives are carried out. The types of control activity that should be used in an accounting system to address system weakness and can be remembered using the mnemonic spam SOAP. So this one is the word will help us to remember the 5 control. So the first one, we have a segregation of duties. Segregation of duties is all about not to do the whole work by one person. So for example, if someone is responsible to open the checks or receiving the cash, this person should not be responsible to deposit the money in the bank or recording how much they received. So basically, you're putting the segregation, or you're putting the barrier, or you split it between two person, one work, so that better way you can check it. For example, if someone opened the post, record the check received and bank check received. If it is done by the one person, there is no segregation of duties. So this can be built into the integrated computer system. Example, invoice is raised by one user, but manager must log in and approve them. So that means like you should not raise the invoice at the same time you approve it, because there is a possibility there is a fraud could happen. The next one is a physical control, like a security. So you put the security next to the door so that no one can go inside and steal something. Authorization and the approval. For example, every company have authorization policy. For example, if the transaction is big, for example, if the transaction is more than 50,000 or 5,000, you have to get the authorization from your director. If the amount is less than 500, you need to get the approval from your line manager. So there should be a authorization and approval policy or procedure so that no one can do whatever they like. Management controls. Managers should review whether activity control are being carried out within the organization accounting system. Example, comparing budget to the actual performance. So manager always should review the control is working. For example, if you make a plan or if you make a budget, we need to check this budget is working. That means if we prepare a budget now, we need to look at after that period, is the budgeted figure and the actual figure is same, or is there any difference? If there is a difference, we have to find the reason. So if there is a favorable variance, is good for us. If there is adverse variance, we need to look at why there is adverse variance and we need to look the reason for that. Supervision control. So supervision control is all about there should be a close oversight of the people performing accounting tasks day to day. So someone need to look like a supervisor. For example, when you work in organization, someone need to look at daily basis like we are doing the work properly. So that's basically spam SOAP. Then we have a reviews are performed by the supervisor or manager by looking at the summarize and report of the transactions, example, to ensure they are reasonable. And they can check based on the organization. They can have a arithmetic in accounting control. So this is not very important. Every organization they do that. Reconciliation, the way we do bank reconciliation. So if there is any difference between the sales ledger and the sales ledger control, or purchase ledger or purchase ledger control, or a bank and the cash book, so we need to find the reason and we have to reconcile it. Reconciliation are checks where staff ensure that two different sources of information agree or that any difference are understood. For example, bank reconciliation verify with the bank statement with the cash book. Then you have a personnel control. So here, when we make the recruitment, we need to make sure like the appropriate staff are recruited for the right position. So for example, you're not going to recruit someone who don't know the work properly or never provided enough training so that he can do the work properly. All right, let's have a look one of our activity. So look at activity 1, and in this activity it says consider. So first we need to set control environment. Okay, consider the following scenario at CCC which occur in September 2012. Now remember that this CCC have a company background information that you can find on the back of the book. So at the end of the book, you will see there is a scenario of the company background for this CCC, and also you can find this information on your My AAT portal, and it is called pre-release material. It will be always given before the exams is already given, even though it is not very important because you really don't have to link from that company background, but it is always important to read this because you will have an idea which company is basically you are finding the weakness and what type of company it is, who is their payroll manager, what it is. Sometimes you can link their name and it will give you some additional marks in the exam. So let's read this one. So consider the following scenario at CCC which occurred in September 2012. Stephen was the first to arrive at work on Monday morning. So Stephen was the first to arrive at work on the Monday morning. He opened the post. Now before we read the scenario, let's quickly have a look at the requirement, because if we know the requirement, we can basically identify what we are looking at from the scenario. It's a highlight area of weakness. So we're looking at the weakness from the scenario. All right, so we're just looking at the weakness. So Stephen was the first to arrive at work on Monday morning. He opened the post and began logging check received into the daybook when the telephone rang. So basically he's not concentrating when he's doing the work. So the first thing, he is the one who opened the post and he is the one who basically logged the checks. That means he's the one, he record the check. So it should be a segregation of duty if someone opened the post, and obviously if you do not have another person who logging it, how many check received, maybe one post or one check he lost and no one will know because he's the one who opened and record. It was Margaret to say that she had an emergency dental appointment for that morning, so she would be late for work. Okay, Stephen went back to his task for processing the mail without noticing he had dropped a check behind the desk. So you can see that even he dropped a check behind the desk, he have no idea because he is the one who do all the job alone. Before he had written it into the daybook, Stephen put the daybook with the check inside onto his desk while he went to discuss the morning delivery with the warehouse manager. So he's doing so much at the same time. Then we have here so what he done, Stephen put the daybook so with check inside. So this is one of the risks, so you should not do that, should not put the check inside of the daybook because you can lost it. It's not properly secured, it's not properly locked in a drawer. So this is the weakness. So when you're dealing with the checks or any sort of money thing, you need to make sure like it is properly secured and kept on the drawer as a locked. Then it says Paula Cockridge popped into the office before she joined her husband John for lunch. As she was short on cash and did not have time to go to the bank, she helped herself to £40 from the petty cash tin and told Stephen that John would replace it this afternoon when he returned from their lunch date. So basically, so far we understand. So Paula is not the employee. Her husband work in the company, and she just come to the office and she took £40 from the tin, and that's the weakness, because no one uh, cannot just come and take the money if they're not employee. No one record anything, no one, she didn't sign any paper, she took the £40, and this is a very informal behavior. She took the money from the business and she said my husband will return back after in the afternoon. So this is a very informal, so this is the weakness of any business. Paul Collin asked when uh, Pritpal, one of the filters, would be at work, as he needs some roll of vinyl to move into the warehouse from the pallet delivery outside. Pritpal is certified in counterbalance forklift truck operation. In Pritpal's absence, Jake Brew offered to move the vinyl, as he has shown how to use the forklift by Pritpal on a number of occasions. Paul accepted his offer as Pritpal is delayed in traffic. So you can see here someone using the forklift without having training. So Jake Brew offered to move the vinyl, and because of he see how to use it, so that could be dangerous. This is the one of the weakness for an organization. If he is not qualified to use the forklift, and if he try to use it because he saw few time, that could be dangerous for the company. So definitely it is a weakness for this organization. John was concerned that some customers were becoming increasingly slow in making payment on their credit account. He asked Stephen to prepare a schedule of receivables, but Stephen was busy drawing up the sales invoice. He uses his Word template and manually input detail from the sales team and asked if this could be done next month. Stephen had not changed up late payment recently because he was so busy. So if you don't change up, so if you don't change to your credit customer, normally they will not pay. So if they don't pay, you have to tell them your payment is outstanding. So there is not a good credit control process exist in this organization. That's a weakness. Constructing a receivables ledger from the Word documents invoices took at least 2 or 3 hours, and there was a lot of posts still need to be processed that morning. So you can see here, when you do something manually, it take a lot of time, 2 to 3 hours, and there was a lot of posts still need to be processed that morning. So there's a lot of work left. So this is another weakness. So the time is wasting on the manual process because there is no integrated accounting system in this organization. Sonja, who had been on holiday, was approached by Ron Saylor, one of the sales team. He had been expecting commissioning totaling 800 in his wages, but Margaret, who had covered for Sonja last month, had not processed this and had only prepared these wages based on Ron's basic hour worked. Ron told Sonja that he really needed this money, but Sonja, knowing she could do nothing until the next wages run, told Ron he would have to wait 7 days. Ron was so upset by this news that Sonja was consumed with guilt, and she told Ron that she would borrow the money out of the petty cash tin and replace it when she made wages up next week. So here Ron is taking some money from the petty cash to cover his wages that Sonja forget to pay. And obviously you can see he didn't sign any paper, he didn't sign the voucher, so there is no documentation how Ron took this money from the petty cash. And of course, like there is a risk that in later on Ron can say I didn't receive, or they can forget. So there is a very weak procedure or policy in the business they have. There is no documentation exist if someone take the money from the petty cash. And also, like you can see here, one of the sales Tim, he had been expecting commission 800 in his wages, but Margaret, who had covered for Sonja, had not processed. So basically, no senior manager has told about this commission. So it's basically the Ron, he informed Sonja. So obviously, Ron can ask more or less. Ron can say a wrong figure, but Sonja need to be authorized, get authorization from the manager or from someone else who can confirm yes, this is the commission. So this is a weakness for an organization. Then we have Margaret keeps the company checkbook in the drawer, but as she only worked part-time, the drawer often left unlocked. So if you keep the drawer unlocked, anyone can access. So this is the weakness. So if there is a money or if there is a checks in the drawer, you need to make sure it's always locked. So there is not proper control environment exists in this organization, and there is a lot of weakness. So in this question, they didn't tell us to find what type of fraud could happen. They're asking to find the weakness. So this is all the weakness we highlighted. So in the exam, they normally ask you to maximum to find 3 to 5 weakness, and they will give you 7 or 8 weakness. So if you just find 5, that's absolutely fine. All right, let's move to the next one. The next one, we have limiting access, that we have already talked about it. So if someone is not needed to access in other department information, you don't have to give the access on that. For example, if you work as a bookkeeper, they don't have to see the payroll data. So you need to make the access limited, depends on the requirement. Then you have preventing the errors. So the counting system should have integrated control to verify and validate the input data, the processing of data, and the production of the report. All right, so let's have a look. Our next thing here we have here is security and the IT at CCC. Below is an extract from the CCC IT policy currently in place. And the requirement here is what rule should be put in place regarding the use of and the control of password at CCC, what sort of password control we can put in place, why these are important, and any other issue regarding the current security system. So let's read this question. All computers can only be accessed by staff who have been authorized by management to use CCC computers, and all computers must be password protected. Computers must only be loaded with licensed software owned by the company. No changes to software are permitted without the consent of CCC director. No member of his staff is allowed to load any software onto the computer without prior permission from the management. No unauthorized device are to be used for saving, uploading, or downloading work. Example, disk, memory stick, external hard drive, or other devices, other than this purchase approved by the company. Computers should only be used for company businesses and must not be used to access any social networking the site. Now, obviously, this is just the information we have, but it's using the information available in the pre-seen information on CCC. Comment on the following. Now, for that reason, we have to read the CCC scenario that I said that on the back of our book. So let's have a look at that. All right, so this is our scenario for the Cookridge and Cookridge Carpets Limited, and this is the company background and history. You have to make sure you read this scenario because this could be helpful for answer few question. So for this question, we are looking at for the specific thing. I have read this scenario before and I know what is the weakness we have here in order to do the software. They said no one allowed to use the software or download any software that is not provided by the company. So you can have a look here. It said the accounting function office is located on the first floor of the showroom. Access to the office is by the set of chair at the rear of the building. Toilet facility for the staff, so this and that. And we look at the finance team. it says the accounting staff use the 3 computers. So here we are looking at, we want to see is there anyone using the software that is not given by the company or any external device they're using on the computer that is not authorized. So it says the accounting staff use the 3 computer using a business version of Microsoft Word. Absolutely fine, business version, purchased when the company was set up. In addition, a further 2 computers were purchased last year which were used by the warehouse team. The warehouse manager used the installation disk from his home. So the installation from his home computer to put an older version of Microsoft to save the company money. So here we can see we have a lackings here because it should not happen. So we're going to mention this this scenario information on our answer. So let's go back to our question. So we can use this information that we just read. So let's now try to do some question from here. So the first one we are saying here, that is what rule should be put in place in regarding the use of control password. So to use the control password for an organization, it should be very generic and you can use it for any question. So we say password must not to be written down. So the password always need to be remembered, but don't write it down anywhere. So it's a password must not written down. So you should not write it down, the password, anywhere, and the password must not be shared. Password must not be shared with anyone. Then password must change regularly. Password must change regularly. Then password must not be generic. So you should not use the same password. For example, you cannot say, like, for example, gold or silver, you keep a common name password and everyone use the same password. So password should not be generic. Should not be generic. Then we have the next one. We can say, like, when a staff member leave, the password should change. So for example, if someone working in the finance team, and if this person is a leave, then we should not keep the password the same, so he can access from somewhere or any sort of advantage he can take. So when any staff leave, the password must change. And then you can say, like, the password access can only be set up for the new staff management authorization. So without management authorization, no password should set up. If I like to set up a password, I have to always take the authorization from the management. So it's look like a valid point, and that's enough for the first one. The next one is why it is important. The reason it is important because the rules and the control protect the integrity, and of course the system of control will work if we follow it. Otherwise, if someone uses a generic password, then what will happen? there will be a lot of mistake and the error, and sometimes it will be hard to find who done the mistake. So if this is the case, like if someone have access like as a common password, so everyone can do error and no one will accept who did it. And also access to the system should be controlled so that staff are not granted access to the part they not required. For example, if you work for the HR, you don't need to access the payroll area. So when you have information in the drive or in the Dropbox or in a cloud, so you should access or limit the access so that only the people can see what they are need. The last one is said, note any other issue. The other issue that we have just discussed, we discussed the warehouse manager. So what they are doing, so they are using the home version of the software in the business PC, and that is against the company policy and procedure. So the policy state that only licensed software need to be used, but actually we can see the warehouse manager they are using not only the home version but also the old version that could be dangerous for the company and against the policy without the authorization for the management. So there is no evidence of the payroll and the purchase system being regularly backed up. So we don't see like they're taking a backup for the payroll. When you work in the payroll, we need to make sure like we're taking a backup. So we don't see like other issue. You can say no evidence of regular backup of the payroll. Payroll always need to back up, and also the purchasing system we don't see is regularly checked. Then the local backup device or cloud-based, nothing is seen on the scenario. It is not stated whether Stephen is using company purchase hardware for the backup of the cell system or not. It is not evidence that this is kept off the site and locked away in the company safe in the case of theft or fire. So if you take a backup, we need to make sure like we need to keep the backup somewhere else in case of fire or any other natural disaster. But in the company background, we didn't see any information like that. So this is all we can discuss for this question. All right, let's move on to our next one. The next one, we have an internal control system for different type of organization. Okay, so we have a large company. So of course, when there is a large company, the way of internal control it will be a little bit fast. But we have a small or medium company, then obviously like the internal control will be a little bit smaller than compared to the large company, because when you looking at the organization, also we need to look at how much they can invest in the control system. So it says produce significant amount of data which is usually recorded electronically. Therefore, large companies usually need a mixture of control over electronic data as well as some manual internal control. Large companies usually have a lot of staff, which makes segregation of duty easier. Small company a little bit different. You have few employee and there is not many work, so sometimes one employee involved with so much work. So the company might use simpler accounting system with no more and no like manual control, of course, like they can use it. Then the control credit based, the business tend to have a lot of more document at each stage of their transaction cycle. This paper documentation make it easier to establish an audit trail to implement the internal control and monitor whether they have been adhered to. Alright, so online business will need to different control to physical business. So if you have online business, the control is not same. You don't need a security, you don't need a physical control, as well as a strong control over the IT system. If the business depends on the online, so you need a more control on IT because it could be hacked. There will be need to be good physical control over any inventory, especially as the business often have higher level of return. So if your business depends on something, for example Amazon or eBay, then you might need a warehouse like where you keep these all inventories. All right, the next one we have here, ethical behavior within an organization. So we know we have a 5 fundamental principle of ethics. We have integrity. Integrity is represent the honesty. Then we have a objectivity. Objectivity represent we have to be always straightforward. We cannot be biased. We need to be like avoid the conflict of interest, and obviously we should not do something because of the personal relationship or that will bring some personal benefit to me, not for the whole of the organization. So then we have a professional competence and due care. Professional competence and due care is all about I should have enough knowledge, experience, and expertise to provide the best services to the company. For example, if I know I cannot do the work in a best way, I should not take this assignment. So I should do the work, and I believe I can provide the best services for the company. For that reason, I should have enough capacity and the capability and experience and resources to provide the best services for my client or for the company. Confidentiality. Confidentiality is all about we should not discuss the confidential information to anyone unless it's required by law or it is against the public interest. Professional behavior. Professional behavior is all about we should behave professionally with the respect of law and regulation. We should comply with all the regulation where we running our business, and we should not bring dispute in our accounting profession, because if we do something wrong, it will not only damage my personal reputation, it also damage my institutional reputation as well. For example, if one person is an accountant and if he involved with something wrong, people will not only say his name, also they will say like he is an accountant, so it will damage his professional reputation as well. So you should not do anything. You should avoid to giving the negative reference. You should not say something that is hard to prove. For example, you should not say I'm the best accountant in the town, because it is subjective. It's very difficult to prove you are the best. All right, so let's have a look. We have one question here, activity 3. Let's have a look. This activity 3, it says ensuring ethical behavior at work. Okay, CCC has recently revised its website adding information regarding its mission statement. So we need to look at chapter 1, activity 10. Okay, Stephen, the accounts receivable clerk, has suggested that the 5 ethical principles as set out by the AET Code of Professional Ethics to be added to the website. The directors have agreed and intended to show how CCC accounting function and all other staff achieves this principle in order to demonstrate what an ethical organization it is in practice. All right. So requirement, using the table below, identify how CCC can ensure its accounting function and all other staff uphold the ethical standard demanded by the AET Code of Professional Ethics. All right. So we need to say fundamental principle of ethics. We have integrity, objectivity, professional competence, and due care, confidentiality, professional behavior, and explain how CCC may demonstrate this principle in practice. All right. So we can explain that. So we can say first we need to read the chapter 1, activity 10, and from there we can find it out the issues if we have any. But the question said explain how CCC may demonstrate this principle in practice. So you can actually write some general answer as well. So let's see if we can write something. And before that, just quickly look our activity 1. All right, so you can see here is our activity 10, CCC budget control report. And it says below is the budgetary control report for the newly launched wood effect oak in the Omteco range for Q1 2013. CCC only prepared this once in a quarter due to the level of work required and the ability of the staff to complete this in addition to their current workload. Stephen, who has an AET training, is responsible for completing this analysis. Stephen does not fully understand how fixed costs are absorbed, so he has left this bit blank for now. Stephen has included the cost of delivery and motor expense in the variable cost calculation. So you can see what happened. has included the cost of delivery and the motor expense in the variable cost calculation. This analysis covers only the best-selling product and is prepared and is passed to the director for the review. However, Stephen is unsure as to which area are the most interest to the directors. All right, so this is a scenario, and we have the budget, and we can see here we have a favorable and 2250. We have adverse, that is 11,750. That give us adverse 9550 for the cost variance. All right, so we go back to our question and we'll look at the fundamental principle for this company. So we can write few things for that. So let's start with our integrity. So the first one is the integrity. And we know integrity is all about honesty is the best policy. So we have to be straightforward. So the accounting function and the system should be used to ensure information is accurate and not misleading. And the staff should be ensured that any issue regarding quality of data are raised immediately with the management. The director should ensure that financial statements are completed in a timely fashion. So main thing here on the integrity, we should not, the accounting function should not mislead the information and provide accurate data. The next one we have objectivity. Objectivity, we should avoid the conflict of interest. So staff must not allow bias. Staff must not allow bias and conflict of interest. To override the business relationship. After the objectivity, you have professional competence and due care. Professional competence and due care. This is all about you should have enough training, so ensure employee regularly update their technical knowledge, especially those with a responsibility for payroll, taxes, and financial record keeping. So employees should keep themselves up to date with the updated regulation and tax rules. We can write a lot for that as well, but if you write just a few words, it should be fine. Confidentiality. The information has to be always kept in a secure manner, and we should not share the information with anyone until it is required by law. So we can say the payroll has to be password protected. Information should not share with anyone until it is required by law. And the final one is the professional behavior. So the professional behavior, as we said before, we should not do something that will damage our reputation. That is not only damage our personal reputation, also our institutional reputation as well. So it said ensure staff remain professional. Professional behavior. The staff should remain professional with the management, supplier, employees, and customers. And that's it. Alright, so let's move to our next one. Then we have ethical conflicts. It's the same question, so we will avoid that. We'll go to the next one. What is fraud? So it says the fraud is a crime. Fraud is a crime in which the criminal intentionally make a gain or causes a loss to other person by depriving them of asset. Legally, there are three types of fraud. Fraud Act 2006, false representation, so we're giving the false representation, failure to disclose information. If we failure to disclose information, that's also fraud. And the abuse of the position. If we abuse our position, this is also fraud. With respect to the accounting system, the type of fraud which are important are misappropriation of asset, which is theft, timing and lading, payment of false employee or supplier, and misstatement of the financial statement, which is overstatement of asset, profit, or understatement of profit, losses, or liabilities. So if we try to manipulate our financial statement, this is also fraud. So we have some example of the fraud. Say example of fraud include but are not restricted to. So there could be more fraud as well. It's not only this is the fraud exist. Say falsifying financial statement or documents such as invoices, incorrect accounting to purposely hide debt or overstated profit, false claim about the product being sold by the company, payment fraud including timing and lading, so allocating of cash payment, tax evasion such as understatement of VAT, PAY or corporation tax, money laundering, insider trading. Insider trading when you know an inside information and you tell outside people to take the advantage of that. And we have embezzlement, fraud by employee in position of power or trust within the business, such as by creating fictitious supplier or employee. So this is basically the common example of the fraud. So we have one example here, activity 5. So let's have a look. What they're asking here is say identify the possible fraud that could occur within the CCC even if the control currently in place makes such a fraud unlikely. Using the information obtaining about the CCC from the present information and any existing knowledge about the CCC, consider the key area where fraud may occur within the business. All right, so we have few things. So we have here the purchase and inventory system, then we have a payroll system, we have a bank and cash system, and sales and age receivable system. You need to make sure you read the pre-scene information that I have showed you before. You need to make sure you read it to find it out. Because in the exam they'll give you separate scenario. You don't have to read the CCC information every time, because in the exam they will give you a separate scenario for each question. This is only for this practice question, so you follow the same scenario every time. So the first one is says purchase and the inventory system and the potential fraud. The potential fraud for the purchases and the inventory system could be theft of the asset. So for example, you can say there is a possibility there could be a theft of the asset. So we'll say theft of the asset. So it is possible the computer and the other asset could be stolen by any of the staff within the CCC due to easy access to the accounts office. So anyone can just go in the accounts office so they can steal it. So all this information we are talking now is from the CCC present scenario information. So you need to make sure you read that first before you answer this question. So theft of the asset is one. The next one could be theft of the inventory. Theft of inventory. So as you can see, the CCC, they maintain the inventory on the Excel record and it is a manual accounting system. So it is possible like the record is not up to date, and if it is not updated and ineffective control, if the staff fail to update the record properly, so that will be no way you can find it out there's a theft of the inventory. So there is no mention of control such as inventory count to prevent the theft of inventory from the warehouse. And of course, like because of the spreadsheet used to record the movement of it and the changes to the level of inventory, also an ineffective control as the staff failed to update it. Also, it is possible the overpayment of the supplier invoice. There is no control to verify the check prepared to pay the supplier equal to the amount owed an invoice. So basically, how much is the amount you received the invoice and how much you are preparing the payment. So there is no segregation of data, there is no one check in the middle. So whatever invoice they receive from the supplier, so they just paid. So it is possible there is an overpayment of the supplier invoice. So there is a possibility we pay more to our supplier because no one check it. As soon as they receive the invoice from the supplier, they make the payment to take any sort of discount, any sort of prom discount. So they don't check it, they just paid. So if they do it, obviously it is possible we can pay for the same invoice twice. The next one is the payroll system. The payroll system now on the payroll system we can see here there is not any proper control in place in the payroll system. So we can say what is the fraud could happen, the overstatement of wages. There are no control in place to approve actual wages paid to the staff. So this is a possibility that we can pay more to our staff. So overpayment to employees and overstated of our work. Overstated of hours worked. So how many hours they work, we can pay it more because there is no sort of control in place. Then monetary theft by the setting up a ghost employee. So we can say ghost employee. Ghost employee means like there will be no employee, just make an employee on the payroll and make a payment every week or every month because no one there to check. They can take the advantage of creating a ghost employee and keep paying to that employee. All right, the next one we have here, that is a bank and the cash system. The bank and the cash system, the first one could say the theft of the check. We can say the bank and cash system, theft of check. And because there are few control in place to store the check book securely, and it is stored in a drawer which is not always locked. So if we don't keep the checkbook in a locked drawer, it is possible there could be a theft of the check. Then theft of cash from the office. So if we don't keep the cash properly, because the petty cash tin keep always the petty cash tin is always accessible to all the stuff, so anyone can come, they can just take it. So obviously there is a possibility the theft of cash from the office. So theft of cash. Then we have a theft of cash and check from the till. It is possible they can take the money from the till, and also theft of check from the mail. So no separate control are in place to record the check received. So when we receive the post and when you receive the check, no one there to control, like there's no control how many check we receive. So one person is recording everything. It is possible there is a theft of the check. The next one we have here, sales and age receivable system. So on the sales and age receivable system, we can say the potential fraud could be under recording of goods sold. So there are few control in place to ensure goods sold are actually recorded. So how much we sold to our customer, it is possible we didn't record it all. So we can say under recording of goods sold. Under of good sold, and also the writing of the debt, because there are no control to ensure that debt from the customer are not written off and to ensure that they are write off when they should be. So we don't see any information. It's say like, okay, we have write off this amount of debt, even though it's a long time some customer is not paying, but we are not saying is there any amount we write off. So it's saying there are no control to ensure that the debt are write off on time. So write off debt, writing off the debt. So in explanation, we're going to say there are no control to ensure that debt from the customer are not written off, or to ensure that they are write off when they should be. All right, so that's it for our activity number 5. So we have an impact of the fraud. So let's read a little bit quickly this one. Impact of fraud. Fraud has the following type of impact on a company. Financial impact, so loss of fund or asset. So we can lose some asset and the money because of the fraud. Then because of that, company profitability will go down. Reputation, company reputation could go down because of the fraud. So we can say like the reputation of the company on the eyes of internal and external stakeholder, that will go down, and obviously eventually that could lose in the business. For example, if we find out some information about a company, they are not doing something good or they're doing something wrong, so what will happen, we can have a negative impact for that company. You can say like, oh, this company is not doing, this is not the right way, so maybe the customer will stop going to that organization to buy some product or services. So eventually, if the reputation is bad for the company, there will be financially loss in future. Then employee morale. If the company believe it is not a right company, this company involved with the fraud, they might leave the company or look for the new job. Let's look at some real life example. On the real life example is that the following example illustrates the financial and the reputational impact upon company which have been fined for a financial misstatement or not having sufficient fraud prevention control in place. Example 1, Tesco store. That's a real life example for the Tesco. So what happened here, in March 2017, Tesco store was fined 129 million by the SFO, that is Serious Fraud Office, and ordered to set up an 85 million compensatory scheme for the shareholder and the bondholder who brought share between the result of announcement and the accounting misstatement being made public. So basically in 2017, Tesco prepared the financial statement and they overstated the profit. They shows a lot of profit on the financial statement, but actually they don't have this amount of profit. And when the auditor find this thing and SFO, they give a lot of penalty to Tesco. Tesco settled out of court regarding the charge of false accounting and the misstatement of the profit. The impact on the company was 214 million cash outflow. So because of that, they eventually lose 214 million cash, not including legal cost, with Tesco recording an exceptional charge 235 million for 2016-17 accounting year. So on that year, the Tesco recorded on the financial statement exceptional charge 235 million. The next example we have here, that is example 2 for the Rolls-Royce PLC. So the Rolls-Royce PLC was fined 497.5 million by the SFO in January 2017 in respect of 12 count of the conspiracy of corrupt, false accounting and the failure to prevent bribery over a period of 30 years. In addition, the company was fined 170 million by the US Department of Justice and 25 million by the Brazilian authorities. So you can see when you have a lot of fraud, you can end up with a lot of penalty. Example 3 is Standard Chartered Bank. The Financial Conduct Authority FCA fined the bank 102 million for failing to maintain adequate anti-money laundering control between November 10 to January 13. So this sort of real example shows if there is a fraud, it is possible we can end up with a lot of penalties. Alright, so this all we're going to learn from here. Maybe on the next session we're going to talk about our control to prevent and the systematic weakness. So how to prevent this sort of fraud. So in the next session we're going to talk about our prevention of the fraud.